Welcome to the University of Lethbridge and tonight's special event, Research That Is Out of This World. I would ask the panelists to please be seated. I'm Kathleen Massey. I'm the Associate Vice President Students. We've gathered here today a remarkable panel of 4 U of L research scientists and a very accomplished astronaut to discuss space science and exploration. Tonight's moderated discussion is being live streamed across the world. Your handout includes information about each of the panelists and the 2 themes that will guide this evening's discussion. By the way, there will be time for you to ask questions later on in the evening. The panelists and moderator will be introduced shortly, but I would ask you at this point in time if you would kindly turn off your cell phones or put them on silent. I would like to now introduce you to Dr. Shelley Wismath, Dean of the School of Liberal Education at the University of Lethbridge, and invite you to enjoy the discussion this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this fabulous panel event tonight at the University of Lethbridge. As Kathleen has told you, I'm Shelley Wismath. I'm the Dean of the School of Liberal Education. And I think tonight's event is a great example of the flourishing of liberal education at this university. Our liberal education model here emphasizes a number of things, a broad-based education across disciplines that allows our students to connect the knowledge from different disciplines and different viewpoints to tackle complex questions in a holistic way. We also emphasize critical thinking and civic and community engagement. And as our panelists discuss space science and exploration and the impact of those on us here on Earth, I think you'll see those themes in action tonight. You will certainly see a commitment to breadth and connection across disciplines, to careful, reasoned thinking about our world, and to engagement in our communities. And when we talk in LibEd about community engagement, we usually add from the local all the way up to the global. And tonight we can extend that to the universal, because we're moving beyond our own globe. One of the other main threads of liberal education in our approach is the importance of conversation, of ongoing reasoned and civil discussion and debate about important ideas. Tonight, you will hear some of that conversation, and we're very happy to invite you to join in the conversation with our distinguished guests. So I will now turn things over to our panel moderator, Dr. Claudia Malacrida, who is Associate VP of Research at the university.
Good. Thank you. So thank you, Shelley, for that, for the thoughtful introduction. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't just doff my hat briefly to Kathleen Massey, who's the Associate Vice President of Students, who has really facilitated this, and to the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and particularly Catherine Reeder, who's been fabulous to work with. I want to thank also university, community, and children. I hope there's some children here for showing up late at night. And I'll briefly, you have it in your programs, biological notes or bio notes of all of the members, but I'll briefly ask people just to nod their head. We have, first of all, Dr. Craig Coburn, who's an associate professor specializing in remote sensing and situated in the Department of Geography. David Naylor, Professor of Physics and Astronomy and Tier 1 Board of Governor Research Chair at the University of Lethbridge. Our esteemed guest, Doug Wheelock, Colonel retired in the U.S. Army and NASA astronaut. There's a title. Well done. Olga Kovalchuk, who is Professor of Biological Sciences, Board of Governors Chair in Cancer and Canadian Institute of Health Research Chair in Gender and Health. And last but certainly not least, Locke Spencer, Assistant Professor and Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Experimental Astrophysics. So we have a pretty outstanding panel here, and we do have a couple of key themes. They are also on your programs and are worth looking at. We decided that rather than focus on science, we talk about the impact of science and what it means to be in space in terms of its reflection on what happens on Earth. So our first question is really a simple one, and I'm going to read it because it's simple and long. It can seem to some that the kind of high-level exploration that each of you do, whether that is on Earth or in space, is necessarily quite planned or controlled. But we also know that once you're in the field or in the lab, surprises, challenges, and synergies occur. So we're going to ask our panelists to identify some surprises that they may have encountered in the context of their space-related work and how they responded to those challenges and what happened then. And if I could, I'd like to ask you to open it up, Doug.
Me?
You, yes.
Okay, all right.
I said that really quietly. I appreciate it.
Thank you, no
Sorry.
problem. Thank you. Actually, thank you to the university and to everyone for being here and this incredible staff. Kathleen, thank you as well for your hospitality. It's been really great. It's my first trip to Alberta, which is really wonderful. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, so not far from the Canadian border. So I spent a lot of time at the Thousand Islands and the St. Lawrence River and also spent my childhood kind of up this way. So actually, there were so many things that surprised me about space. I was an engineer by trade and a test pilot by training as well, and so I thought I was ready, for what I was about to encounter. And because we tend to, we do this in life a lot, but we tend to look at the glamorous side of things, and so how cool would it be to be floating around in space? And actually, when it's not so cool when the alarms go off and you're on a spaceship. And so actually that happened to us in the summer of 2010. We had a critical failure on the space station. So I had been on board for about a month. I launched in the middle of June of 2010. It was July 31st. It was a Saturday. And we operate the station on GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. So Saturdays normally we have off, and it was 11:30 p.m. Greenwich, and so everyone was in bed except for me. And so I'd like to do my runs usually on the treadmill late at night. And so the thing that shocked me was I got on the treadmill. We have to turn off a smoke detector that's inside of the panel where the treadmill is, and then run on the treadmill. Then once we get off, turn the smoke detector back on. As soon as I did that, I was heading, kind of floating back like Superman to my crew quarters, and the alarms went off. Lights dimmed, experiments turned off. All of our life support systems kind of went to half power, and the alarms were just sounding, and all kinds of cautions and warnings coming into the space station computers. And I just remember it woke everyone up, of course, and I was looking at the laptop. We had a central command post where we can watch the caution and warning coming in, and there was too many to read. And when I tried to read one, another one would scroll in, and I turned around, and all of my crewmates were there. They said, "What did you do?" And I was like, "I don't know." And so it was a critical failure that we had on the outside of the space station. It took us a couple of days to really figure out what was going on. And so for about 16 days, it took us 3 spacewalks and 16 days to really fix this. It was something we had never really planned on. And it was terrifying, to be honest with you. And at that point, I really realized the incredible power in the team concept, and pulling together as a team and working collaboratively with all different disciplines of science and engineering. And so it took some creative thinking to figure out what happened and how are we going to fix this. And so that was probably my most alarming moment. A little play on words there, but no pun intended. But it was an incredible experience, and really kind of recalibrated my compass and to understand that space is a very, very dangerous environment, very unforgiving of mistakes, and critically and terribly terrifying in the face of complacency. And so it helped me to kind of look at the area of science a little more intently, and the area of teamwork as well and collaboration. So.
Thank you. So who's brave enough to follow that great story up, huh? Lot. Well done.
Well, the check engine light went on my Cavalier. No, in all sincerity, though, I think for me, the biggest surprise is that I'm actually sat here. When I first decided what to do in school, I went into engineering because I wanted to get a degree and get a job and do something useful instead of just being at university forever. And little did I know that I had such power over a global economy. Every time I finished a program, like nobody was hiring and there was absolutely no opportunities. And I stumbled into working with David Naylor as a master's student. I stumbled into actually working on this amazing space project, the Herschel Space Telescope. And when I finished my master's, there's an opportunity to do a PhD. The PhD program did not exist in physics until I was right there with my master's in hand ready to see this project to launch. And that was incredible. When I finished my PhD, there were multiple people who had headhunted me and informed me of positions to apply for. And I did, and I wouldn't get called for interviews because positions would be canceled and lots of crazy things. But I've found this random walk into this amazing career to be able to really help be part of the teams, the huge teams of people that chase these answers, that look up at the sky and try to figure out how all this stuff works. And it's really humbling to be able to rub shoulders with some really great minds and brilliant people who are all just dedicated to getting the job done and getting the most they can out of their instrument, out of their project, out of that. And it's those questions, that search, that drives people. International borders vanish, and it's really just people trying to figure out what makes things work. And I think that's really humbling.
Yeah, that passion and curiosity, I think, is critical. And I think it's also important that, you both raise points. I mean, you have this trajectory of what you're going to do, and you believe it. And we're taught the scientific method. We have a hypothesis, and we test that, and away we go, and we figure out if it's right or not, or provable or disprovable, and that's the end of the story, or we move to something else. But that's not how I think it often works, right? Would anybody like to add to that? Or? Go, Olga.
Yeah. Well, actually, when I was thinking about what has happened that was completely unexpected, mistake, not mistakes, but something serendipitous, what came to mind was actually something that happened long years right after I joined the University of Lethbridge, which was in the year 2001. So originally, back in Switzerland, we used some of the plant models to study low-dose radiation effects. And when I came here, I thought, it's time to go back to the roots. I'm a medical doctor by first degree. Let's start working with animals, mammals, humans. And I thought it would be really neat to do a small experiment on how very low doses of radiation, similar to the ones that occupationally exposed, would just affect animals. And I just wanted to have just a comparison of a single dose versus couple doses of exposure protracted. So I'll go to my good friend and mentor, Brian Kolb. Everybody knows Brian. So I knock at his door and said, Brian, look, you work with mice for quite some time. Is there a way you can spare, let's say, a litter of animals? Because we just want to test this hypothesis that low doses, depending upon how delivered, will have slightly different effects on animals. And he said, sure. What do you want to look at? What organ? And I said, does it matter? I was like, something more or less uniform, because I just want them to be litter mates so that there is no, what we call in genetics, genetic noise, so that they're more or less similar. And he said, yeah, sure. Do you care if they're males or females? I was like, I don't think so. Let's look at the muscle. It shouldn't matter. Or let's look at the liver. That definitely shouldn't matter. And I was like, yeah, sure. So I got this litter. We do the experiment, and the first thing we do is like, oh my God, it matters. They are different. And we totally haven't expected any of that. So we were absolutely shocked. I go back to Brian and I said, Brian, what's happening? He was like, oh my gosh, that's true. It's really so very different. So this was actually absolutely serendipitous. Slightly maybe funny because we honestly didn't plan for it. We just thought muscle tissue, come on, it's muscle everywhere. Well, obviously it's not. So, and it was actually the beginning of the entire field that later led to the chair in gender and health research and so on and so forth. And now it became an almost accepted fact that actually men and women respond differently to radiation. Because previously, believe it or not, everything was based on Manhattan Project, which was essentially 30-year-old males who were a part of it. And that was essentially it. It was considered, depends upon how much you weigh and sort of what body stature you are. It's not, it was absolutely like an original kind of, I would say, a mistake in planning an experiment that led to a really big discovery, which was amazing.
Thank you.
So, Doug and I were talking about the differences between what he does and what we have to do. We launch things that have to subtend 10 Gs at 75 hertz, and you've got to deal with 3 maybe or so. So we always envy you guys because you get a really gentle ride into space. So when you build... Yeah, coming back on a Soyuz is different. That's the Tower of Terror on steroids or something. Yeah. So one of the things when you build experiments that go into space, from cradle to grave is 2 decades, typically 20 years. So you've got to design the features into your instrumentation to be able to address the problems of the day that are 20 years out. So you build in a lot more flexibility. It's no point in designing something that would answer today's questions. You have to design things for the future. So you typically launch a spacecraft with dozens of operating modes, and it's not until you get out there that you realize the ones that you really need, and they will change over time. But when you build space hardware, you always build a flight spare model, which is identical in every way. It's completely a mirror image. And to the guy that wired the bits, or the girl that coded it, or whatever, it's identical. And so that if there is a problem in space, the space station's at 400 kilometers or so, but we go out to the second Lagrangian point, which is 1.5 million kilometers, and we're full of liquid helium. There's no servicing possible out there, and we are subject to a much more intense radiation field than you get in at the space station. So the parameters, the environment out there is poorly known. And actually, it wasn't our experiment that suffered this mayhem, but it was another instrument on the Herschel Space Observatory that had a malfunction, and they did not know what caused it. It was an SEU, a single event upset when you get a cosmic ray striking some electronics. And they had to go through what we would have had to go through. So while your instrument is in space, your flight spare instrument is ready at all times to conduct any test you demand of it, to figure out, to try and debug, to diagnose what might have gone wrong. And in the case of our instrument, we had several, I think 5 proto-flight model tests. I mean, Locke was involved with many of these. We tested the pants off it. Space is risk, and you got to mitigate it or you find another field, right? It's that simple. So you've got to deal with the risk, and you deal with the risk by measuring and remeasuring and making sure you've tried to figure out everything that could potentially go wrong. And NASA dwells on this kind of analysis. And in this case, for this other instrument, they got a problem. They knew it was a cosmic ray. It called an SEU, and they'd no idea what caused it. And so they had to try and replicate what they think might have happened. And then they had to have the nerve to turn the instrument on. And, you know, it's a billion-dollar mission, right? I mean, you mess it up, then you're looking for another job. So that wasn't my experience. Our instrument worked, so but it could have been us. And so I think the point is that risk is the currency of what we do. You launch something to 1.5 million kilometers, you better get it right. And I'm off to Madrid on Thursday, and we're dealing with ESA about the Speaker mission, and we're looking at all the risks, and we have to raise the TRLs of our instrument to TRL 5 at this point to get selected for the next mission. So it's highly competitive. It's 20 years long, cradle to grave. you've got to be passionate, and it takes teamwork. I mean, you're surrounded by a lot of really smart people all over the world. I deal with 15 countries in umpteen time zones, and it's pretty challenging. I'm always getting up at 2 a.m. to talk to somebody in Japan or Europe. It's not good. If Canada had a bigger space program, they'd have to get up early, but we don't.
We'd never sleep, that's it. So Craig, do you want to add anything? Or?
Sure. Well, that leaves me. I'm the geographer in the group, and I'm a remote sensing scientist, so I look at things for a living. The rest of them look at things for a living, but it's different. I mean, you might look out, I look back, so our mission's planet Earth. And for me, the biggest surprise actually was a phone call. I don't expect to get these things. I also, not unlike others on the panel, I build and develop instruments, and I built a giant robot. Some of you may have seen it, and those that are in my class that are here today, bonus points, you'll see it later. But I picked up the phone, and it was NASA, and they were calling, and they wanted me to come, and we were looking at a desert. Now, it's not an exciting place to go. My wife wishes I would start doing sensible research instead of the remotely sensible research, so that we could go somewhere nice. You know, going off to a desert to do a sun-up to sundown set of measurements that replicate all of the solar angles that Earth-observing satellites would see sounds like fun, but is horror. So I load all of this equipment. I mean, NASA calls. I'm just at a little university in Lethbridge. What are the chances? 0. So I'm taking that call, right? And they said, would you come? Like, would you be part of our international team? We're trying to establish this center so we can do absolute radiometric correction for all sensors on Earth. And I went, well, yeah, I could do that, sure. I can't do that. So I contacted Risk and Safety first, and I said, is this okay? They had no, what? You're going to do what? I said, well, and I called U-Haul, and I rented a van, and I loaded all of this equipment in the van, and I drove it all the way to California so that only the best in my field are there. I've never met these people before in my life. We're offloading equipment out of the van. I have this incredibly complicated piece of robotics that I've developed in the lab. Well, me and a colleague. And anyways, I'm unfolding everything there, and in essence, you're standing in front of the world's greatest minds in your subject area, and we flip the switch and it doesn't work. So I've just driven 26 hours to a desert in California. It's not the nice part of California, like when you have to put that expense claim in, no one's question. When you're staying in Brawley, you're not staying in Palm Springs. Like, it's not fun. So we're down there, there's no spares. It's not space. It's not a 1.5 million kilometers out. It's only, 2,600 kilometers away. I mean, I could drive home and pick up some spares. So anyway, by the end of the day, we discovered that we took it all apart. I built it, so I can take it all apart, and I can put it all back together. And we figured out what was wrong with it. We got it to work, and we did collect the world's first really dense data set of that type, which was a lot of fun. And the best part was the collaborative effort that happened after the research, right? I mean, the first people were trying to help me when I'm there, and I'm typically Canadian, which is I really would rather not have people help me. I would rather help them. But all these sort of the NASA folks are all coming over, and they're like, well, we could help. And I'm like, I have no doubt you could help. You go to the moon. I had a hard time getting to California, so just respect. But at the end, it was the collaborative effort that happened between the whole team that managed to assemble all the research, and then we've carried on from there. So it's been fun.
I think you all raise a really common point, which is, science, we have this idea of, that woman or man in their tower performing field experiments alone and coming up with something, but it really is a collaborative and building on the shoulders of predecessors kind of an operation. Yeah. We'll move to something a little bit more, I'm a sociologist, so a little more sociological if we could. And one of the things that we also tend to think of is that science is something that is outside of everyday life, that space is something that is outside of Earth, that there's not a relationship between those things. And really, some of the things that happen in space and in the lab have intimate relationships with life and passion and all of these things that matter for humanity. So the question is, whether the most pressing concern facing humanity is overpopulation, conflict between world powers, or environmental concerns, why do you see the solution as being rooted in space exploration or space science and research? Who wants to take that baby on? It's just a little question. Go, David.
Okay, so, well, this is a pet thing, but I think from my perspective, the biggest problem is lack of cheap electrical energy, and I think nuclear fusion is the path forward for humanity to solve that problem. Right now, we're, all our energy comes from burning something or other, and it's not good. It puts carbon into the atmosphere, it leads to climate change. We've just seen the typhoon in Mangut and the Florence and down on the eastern seaboard. We're messing with the planet. But the other advantage of fusion, there are a number of advantages, and the ability to provide cheap electricity would actually solve the problem of water, of clean drinking water, for example, because if you can do desalination, most of the world's population lives near the coast. Craig will be able to tell me what that percentage is. They suffer from bad weather, but they suffer from poor drinking water. Now, we know how to clean water. It's just that desalination is possible, but electricity is expensive, and it costs us in pollution. So fusion, if you fast forward 50 years, it is widely agreed upon from the head of nuclear engineering at MIT, Dennis White, that fusion is the answer. This is not fission. This is not the nuclear bad word that's Chernobyl and Fukushima. It is fusion. And the biggest science project in the world today is the ITER project, which generates electricity by nuclear fusion. And it's been 50 years out, 50 years ago, right? It's a very difficult technical challenge. But there are great advances now occurring that will lead to that, and maybe it's still 30 years out. But if we have cheap electricity, the electricity's got to be able to pump into the existing grid. We don't want to build new pylons. We've got the distribution network set up. We've got electric cars coming on the horizon. They're going to take over the world. We've got to be able to charge these. We get free drinking water, clean water everywhere on the planet. And it's not, it doesn't proliferate. There's no nuclear, it's not weaponizable. Fusion is not a weaponizable source. You get neutrons out, you could breed other atoms, but you're not going to do that. So I think now, why does that link to space? Because helium is the principal product of fusion, and helios is the sun. This is astrophysics. We understand how fusion works from the sun, where we've got to drive the temperature, where the sun drives the temperature up to 15 million degrees. It's a bit harder on the ground. We've got to get it up to 150 million degrees, so we need to come up with the physics to do that. But we understand the physics, and the physics is rooted in astronomy. So I think you've got to provide food and shelter and clothing and look after humanity, but there's no point in continuing to pollute the planet. We have to sort this out. And going to Mars, I think, or the moon, is the most important thing it will teach us is that we have to look after the Earth.
Panelists? Go, Craig.
Sure, I'll go. Yeah. Each one of those three reduces to us, right? That's the fundamental of that question. Each one of it reduces to we have a problem. The rest of the planet doesn't have a problem. And I think that I'm just going to be really short because I can just riff off of exactly what David said. That at first blush, if we look at some of the problems that we have, space not only accelerates the quality and quantity of the science that gets done, so I think that's essential. But the other component that's really important is the degree of cooperation that happens within that sector. I mean, I experience it a little differently than everyone else does, but when I go to talk to there's an international agency that looks after all of Earth observation. I don't know if anyone knows this or anyone would care, but they all get together many times a year, and they collaborate entirely. And I'm like, if the rest of the world could figure that out, there's a field somewhere. They'll join me there. Right? That would be the solution.
So transcending those earthly divisions in that way.
Yeah, if you look back on Earth, which
Yeah.
I do, and you've done as a part of a very small group of people, you don't see the borders, right? So the borders are created, again, by us. So those are the problems. We create these things of our own design.
Doug, do you have anything you could add to
Yeah,
that?
actually, that's really great because we can't see the borders from space, but the border we can see, the most important one is that thin blue line, that atmosphere that makes us different than the other planets. And when you first see that, you see how fragile the planet is. It's from the vantage point of space, it's like this glowing ball of life in a vast empty sea. And it's frightening to look out into deep space. And when you see this Earth and you see that thin blue line, kind of like an eggshell, if you crack an egg open, kind of that thickness, even in proportion, even thinner than that, when you look at the shell of an egg. And so when you look at it in that regard, it really kind of opens your mind to, and at NASA, we're all about returning all of this research to Earth to make life better here on Earth. And so, I know we have a segment of society that says that we need to go to Mars because we need to propagate the human species, as if we take better care of Mars than we take care of Earth, right? So our vision is that it's not the boot landing on the moon or the boot landing on Mars. It's what we're going to discover about ourselves in the process of getting there. So I just completed another tour of duty over in Russia, and so I was the director of operations over there for Russia. And so you can only imagine, like about 5% of my job was technical and 95% diplomacy. And it really is the process of bringing collaboration together and different countries, different peoples, different cultures. And I think the key for us, and the key for us at NASA, we celebrate the freedom of thought. We, as humans, we take sides very, very quickly. So these are my basic freedoms, and so we take sides and then we start hurling insults at each other, right? So there's somebody that believes differently than we do. And so at NASA, we kind of draw back a little bit and say, like, all of those freedoms that we celebrate, and some people are more free than others. Some people don't experience these freedoms. And so, but the freedom of thought is universal. I mean, there's nothing standing in the way of your clarity of thought. And so when we step back from that and to kind of strip away maybe the dogma that we've been entrenched in and open our eyes to the possibilities of working collaboratively, it really opens a whole new world to us. That we can now open our minds to science, that we can find discoveries. A scientist, all the great breakthroughs that we see in science are people, men and women of all ages, all cultures, that they observe and they measure the natural world. And so the things happening around them. And so I always encourage our students, as I did today here at the university, and we will tomorrow, is to always be curious about the world around you. And so, the day that you stop being curious is the day that you stop growing, and the day that you will never accomplish, you'll never accomplish your dreams or the goals that you're looking for in your own life as well. And so we encourage that in our science. And, science is much different. So the scientist, with these great breakthroughs, it reveals to us, the beauty of the scientific method. It's like, we look back and say, like, wow, that was pretty amazing. When it was just clarity of thought and perseverance through a field of science. And usually what we've in history is replete with these examples that you just have a spark of innovation in one area, just a spark of innovation, or clarity of thought, and it could become revolutionary, maybe in that field of science, maybe in a completely different field of science. And so for the poets and the artists out there, so the scientist is much like the poet. The poet reveals to us beauty that's around us that we miss because we're too busy. We don't see the beauty in this different scenery or the beauty in words even, because we miss them because our lives are so busy. So the poet comes along or the artist and reveals that beauty to us. It's like, but it was there all along. It's the same thing with science. And so we try to incorporate that same thinking with just clarity of thought, opening our minds to the infinite possibilities.
So this is the moment that I step out of my moderator role. I promise I'll step back in, but I have been a participant and privileged to be so as part of a federal review that happened a year ago on funding for science. And one of the repeated comments and pillars of that review panel was that research should be unfettered and should be funded adequately so that states and governments are not necessarily mandating what the question is or what the answer is. And this is, I think, really supported by what you have to say. I mean, a free inquiry leads to answers that we can't imagine. Right.
Well, a couple of thoughts, and I don't want to detract from all the good things that have been said already on this topic, but the thing that's been running through my mind continually as we've been on this, I grew up in the Scouts program, and part of the Scout promise is to be wise in the use of your resources. And I think if we look around and look at some of the challenges that we have and difficulties we have, I mean, at a community level, at larger, even global levels, a lot of it can come back to that point. Are we using the resources we have to the best of our abilities and the best of our knowledge, and are we seeking better and to improve on our knowledge, improve on that utilization? And the other thing that's going through my mind is that for any group of people, any individuals, there's a lot more in common than we have that differentiates us. And cooperation is key. And if we can make our community better and have improvements and be working in the right direction, and if everyone did that, then obviously the problems wouldn't go away overnight, but we'd be in a position to better deal with them. And then attack some of the trickier global challenges that we have that no single individual can or can be expected to address, but we can do our little part.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And sort of to wrap this question up on a little bit of a more positive note, we oftentimes do hear right now that, for example, we have all sorts of challenges. We have, what do we have? Shortages of water. We do have issues with air quality. We do have issues with pollution. We have issues of food shortage. And actually, you know, it's true and it's not true. And I must confess, I'm a huge fan of Peter Diamandis, one of the most brilliant speakers and visionaries of this, you know, of our generation. And if you haven't read his book called Abundance, please do read it. It actually gives you a very positive outlook. We're not living in the world of shortage. We're actually entering the time of abundance. Why? Because our technology and what we have learned from variety of our previous explorations, we can start using it. Because thinking about what technology can do and about our limitations is almost like thinking, you know, in the prehistoric world, if you stand in front of the apple tree and you have gathered all the apples you could get your hands to and your friends to kind of help you out, and then there's a ton of apples on the very, very top, there's no way you can get to them. And then you say, darn, we have a shortage of apples. No, we don't have shortage of apples. We have shortage of the ways to get to them. Same thing with energy, like David was commenting. We don't have shortage of it. We have to have this technology in order to harvest the energy. Same thing with solar power. If you look at this vast amount of ocean that covers our planet, how much of that energy hits the ocean? Can we harvest that energy and then use it for something good? Same thing is actually, you know, trying to develop strategies how to treat and prevent disease based on what we already know about our bodies. And not thinking about what are the limitations and what's the problem and how can we leave this planet and go and kind of mess up somewhere else. You know, rather, why don't we just rather use our ingenuity to improve our current home? And I think we are now being forced to use that ingenuity because we are starting feeling those shortages. There is no more room to mess around. It's either innovate or or go like in that commercial, we're leaving the earth because we are allergic. So, we don't want to leave the earth because we are allergic, but rather actually we want to learn from variety of experience that's already there and make a positive outlook and innovate and continue innovating. And that's which is actually going to prove that we really have abundance around us. We just have to harvest it the right way.
So tonight's themes of space exploration and its value to the human condition and its relationship to geopolitics, I think leave me particularly begging a question, which is, why do we do this kind of work? And I think on a related level, how do we do this kind of work that it remains clear to its higher purpose, which is the betterment of humanity? How do we keep science clean and pure? How do we translate the things that we do to those who run our planet politically or economically to contribute to the better good? And how does space exploration help us to make those arguments? So maybe Doug, you could help kick us off on that.
That's all. How much time do we have?
Yeah, it's a big question. It is a big question.
So let me start with the hard one first. Is the collaboration? Working together as different cultures. It's I think back, I don't know what's happened. Why we've created some segments of society that we've somehow have gotten to a point where people think differently than us, and so we go on the attack. And so I don't know how that happened. I certainly don't have the solution other than to continue to work together collaboratively with other scientists, with other countries, and try to do my part to make this a better place. And so one of the things that we're doing on the station, all of our one of the very most kind of in-your-face kind of things once you first get to space is that you're on life support. You're living literally on life support for the 6 months you're there. We regenerate all of our energy comes from solar power, from our big solar arrays on the side of the station. We recycle everything on board the station. In fact, we have a joke that yesterday's coffee is tomorrow's coffee on the space station, and let that sink in. Just talk amongst yourselves. But we're doing this not because that's what we need to do to survive. We're trying to push the edges of what we know in the way of recycling and reusing things that we would normally just kind of discard. And so, in the process, it's helping us return that science to Earth and really kind of revolutionizing the other areas of science. People come up, hey, that's a great idea. Let me try this. And when I was on board in 2010, there was a problem in Madagascar with the deforestation. And I remember we had a willow tree experiment on board, and part of my science was to take images of Madagascar, and I noticed that the rivers and streams were all choked with mud. All of the topsoil was eroding from the central part of the island because the trees were all cut down. So the scientists were trying to look at the genome of the willow tree, how we can grow trees quickly and quickly get more biomass back into that soil to make the soil more nutrient rich so we can reforest areas. And not only for Madagascar, but for crop farmland around the world. And so these are some of the things that we're doing from space, Earth observation, and returning that science to our farming, our water resources. Did I just go out? Oh, there we go. Our water resources, things like that, better use of water. Dr. Naylor, you hit it on the head with the desalinization of water is just so critical, and it seems like it's right there, And then we do experiments on board the station, and the surface tension of water is just so amazing. We actually use it in our science on board because it's such a strong force inside of the water molecule. So it's just very, very interesting the way that all of our science on board the station is, number one, to keep us alive, And also, we're staying in space for 6 to 8 months. We've had folks that have stayed longer. And what that is a replication of what we think is going to be a transit to Mars. And so in the process of learning how to live and work in space and return this science to the Earth, we're also getting the benefit of seeing if it's possible to send our kids and our grandkids to Mars. And so so all of our science on board the station, everything that we're doing is to make new discoveries here on planet Earth. So, and a lot of that is environmental as well. So,
Need to give it back in that sense.
absolutely, yeah.
Does anybody have a comment?
I think one of the advantages of space is it's too costly, and so you need to partner. We've done the easy stuff. We've done the simple experiments, and now the flagship missions, the James Webb Telescope speaker, hopefully, but the bigger missions require that we join forces. Nobody can afford to do it on their own anymore. And actually, I think that's a great equalizer, because what that means is, okay, you've got to bring together nations, find the talent in those nations, and then put that talent together to make something really big. And, I love working with the Italians, talking about cultures you have to deal with. I never understand my Italian colleagues, whether they're fighting or whether they're happy. They're just like, I try to normalize them. The Japanese are really quiet. The Americans pretty much tell you where they're at, and it's great. The French sometimes tell you things. I mean, there's a whole dynamic. But the Italians are the ones that I've never figured out. We'll go out, is this a really problem? I said to one of my Italian colleagues on SPY once, I said, Paolo, it would be better if he was complaining that they hadn't been funded for some time, for over a year, for their space IFC. And I said it'd be better if the mafia was running the Italian Space Agency. And he turned to me and said, David, they are. That's the problem. So I think it's a real, you get to experience different cultures, and that breaks the ice. You get to know how people work. But the good thing now is that we're all in this together. No one can do it alone anymore. And so that breaks down the boundaries. If we don't all sign up for this, much like fusion, you're going to miss out on it, because this ship is going to sail and you want to be part of the team.
So it becomes a model for other ways of inquiring and operating too. Craig?
Yeah, there's, how do you say it without sounding trite? This is all you have. This is it. The coffee analogy rings home. Anyone who knows me knows that I do imbibe. But that's also true on Earth. It's not just it's a microcosm. You accelerate the process, but that process is exactly the same on Earth. All that we have is all that we have. There is no more. We're getting a little bit of dust from space and a few other things, but it's not significant. We forget that every once in a while. We get too big for our boots. Geopolitically, people start thinking that they matter and that they're bigger than this, or that they're going to fluff up their chest and they're going to demonstrate to the world that they're a strong man or whatever. But in truth, we're all really rather pitiful on this planet. And as a geographer, when I go into the field, you're not looking for death; it's just always there. But these are the realities of field work. And when you start experiencing things a little different. I remember I spent a summer one time in the field when I was a student, and I was completely isolated. We didn't have news. There was no radio. It was liberating. It was fantastic. And I came back to all the problems that had happened in that 4 months, and my university student colleagues were all concerned. And what did I think about these things? And I went, what is that thing? And I continue to almost, you almost want that little bit. And you go, gee, when I didn't know that the whole world was falling apart, it seemed like everything was just fine, right? Yeah. And if we think about these things geopolitically a little bit, and we take back some of that power, like I think on the science side, if funding is the problem, like if dollars are the problem, then we have to stop using dollars, because they're half fake dollars anyway. We've robbed Peter and extorted from Paul, and
who might argue.
I might as well throw something out in the last, right, to spark the debate for later. But how come that's what prevents ideas? That's insanity. These are, as part of the elite of the world. As Canadians and Americans, we get to say that we're in that group. You can't stop ideas. That's your next currency. That's the next economy. That's where we win next. You know, drawers of water and hewers of wood is a great Canadian thing, but next it's going to be mines, right? And that's where you're going to win.
We do have to support those ideas, though.
Yeah, but however we can,
Yeah.
including just saying, oh, base levels of funding, or just remove the monetary problem. When I go and do field work with NASA these days, I just say, well, I'll just do it. Why? It's worth the doing. And then I just give the data back. I want that available to the world. I don't want to silo it. That's insane. You need to get those things and push them out.
So we'll have a couple of quick comments, and then I think we will turn it over to the audience. So please.
So I think that, well, a lot's been said, and the question, why do we need space research? And I don't think that's going to solve all of our problems. In fact, I can't bear that weight on my shoulders if that's what it is. But the pursuit of knowledge and the freedom to explore all sorts of areas of science and to make those discoveries, I think, is really important. And Doug, you mentioned something earlier about our freedom to think, and that is universal. Although I think there's tools that go along with that. One of my colleagues was talking about one of the programs on campus, and they wanted a certain group to be more involved in that, and they were talking to one of the experts, and they said, well, what do we need to change to get this group more involved? And the person said, basically, well, you kind of have to go back to about the grade 3 level and start training other skills from there, and then as that grows, those tools and those resources will be in hand when students come into our door and go into our programs. And I think education is key, that if we can make sure that everybody has the freedom to learn, then we'll be able to have a huge army solving or attacking all of these challenges that we have.
Anything over?
Well, I guess the most important of all, when you think about space, what comes to your mind? Spacecraft, right? Stars, stations, telescopes. I'd say from a standpoint of a person who's doing health-related research, the first thing that comes to my mind is humans, people. Because any technology, any metal thing, yeah, David will say, no, what the heck, it's $1 billion. But, ultimately, yes, you can replace with another $1 billion. Human, any individual with his or her unique experiences and unique contributions and that freedom of thought, you cannot replace. If it's lost, it's lost. It's lost to the entire community. It's lost to the entire world. So, and as such, it all boils down to the collaboration between human beings and in that open-minded approach of actually really working together. And indeed, space exploration has been one of the areas where it really beautifully worked across the borders, across the countries, across the nationalities, where people really work together. And we learned a lot, and we continue learning a lot. One important aspect is how much of our healthcare later on depends upon space innovation. And it's actually very true, because a lot of our, health issues, things like, issues with our mobility, issues with arthritis, and so on and so forth, actually are based, the new treatments are based on some of the research that actually is being done during space exploration, something that we are learning that we're then, as Doug said, bringing back to Earth to implement here on Earth. And that is why, building that human potential and that human interest and human innovation is essentially pretty much the key to everything. Yes, of course, having money is always good. I don't know if Department of Physics and Computer Science can come up together and mine some Bitcoin. Or Ethereum, which is more Canadian. But in reality, the biggest capital is your human capital. And that's the biggest capital of every industry, be it space or be it anything else.
Thank you.
I have to tell a funny story here. Our daughter is a teacher, and I've been to many of her schools. And I talked to one of her classes where there was this child, probably in grade 4 or 5, before the age where you got picky about wearing the right gear. So his shirt wasn't tucked in, his buttons were undone, his hair was stuck up. But they were asking questions, and he asked some really difficult questions. But he asked, I'd like to do what you do. What do I have to do? How long do you have to stay in school? And I looked at him without missing a beat, and I said, well, I've never really escaped. And he just collapsed. in his feet, but I think Locke is right. That's when everything is possible. When you're that age, nothing is impossible. And somehow the education system beats the creativity out of you, and we've got to get the kids, we've got to create really good teachers who take that passion into the schools so we don't lose them before we get them, because we're at the end of the food chain as professors, but if grade 1 isn't done properly and an inquisitiveness, then we're in big trouble.
Yeah. Thank you kindly. All right, I think now we'll take a little shift and move towards audience questions. I think there's microphones down here, and I'll try to moderate those to the extent possible. Should we have house lights up a little bit, do you think? Just in case somebody falls down the stairs and breaks their necks. We have lots of doctors here, but none of them are medical, so it won't be helpful, you know. So, he beat you to it. Are you, you guys are bouncers or? I'm not sure. So. Yep, you're the first brave man. Please just let us know your name and.
Perry Saby.
Hi.
Is that help?
Yep, sure.
Okay.
No, it's just nice. It's Canadian. We're being Canadian here.
Oh, okay. Perry Saby, eh?
Nicely done.
All right. So I agree that in the future, probably one of the best currencies we could have is minds and information and things like that. But in the meantime, we're stuck with money, and in the world of science and research, funding tends to be one of the biggest headaches when it comes to doing research and getting stuff done. One of the newest types of funding available is crowdsourcing. And I'm wondering, in your experience, how effective is that compared to other sources of funding? Because it's not specific, and there's not necessarily an agenda behind it like corporate or government funding, but at the same time you got a whole bunch of people saying, give me my perks, where are my perks and things like that. So in your experience, how effective is crowdsourcing, or is there more potential that we're not quite getting yet?
Who's got a GoFundMe page? Come on, fess up.
I don't, but my student from last year got a job with Elon Musk after working in my lab, specifically because he worked in my lab. So when Musk launched the Tesla, I asked my student if he could get me one. That's as close as I came to crowds.
You mean that one that flew to space or the other one?
Yeah, the one from the space.
I don't
The
think
flight
that's what
spare.
he's talking about, actually.
No, I know he's not. No, I mean, that's an interesting concept. I mean, but the funding that we have comes from the public purse. Thank you all for paying taxes, and we get that. And we're given it in trust, and we're supposed to train students, and we're supposed to report on what we've done. But there is a whole chain of accountability in all of that. We have to apply, we're peer reviewed in everything we do. If our work doesn't measure up, we will not get funding. It's that black and white. And so there are checks and balances in all the way. There's ethics committees if you're doing things that Olga's doing with radiation on animal models and so forth. There's things that have got to make sure she's treating her mice properly. And there's an ethical backdrop to everything we do. And I would worry that crowdsourcing might be, a fad, a fashion. How do you know the money's being well spent? How do you know the goal has got good intent behind it? Is it pure, unbridled, basic research, which is what we need to do? And I'm not sure that's the model to fund it. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you have some money that you'd like to,
Well,
maybe I can convince you.
Go ahead.
yeah, I could say that in terms of crowdfunding, there have been some successful projects whereby some graduate students were really excited about their work and actually put it forward and raised some funds. towards their project. But that's more of a, in a smaller scale. There is a big, the big trend now, and I was not joking when I said blockchain and when I said Bitcoin and when I said Ethereum. This is actually something that's coming in. It's coming in very forcefully, and it's sort of, very quickly. And it opens a lot of opportunities. I just came back from a big congress in Basel, and there was actually a really big session on healthcare and blockchain. How you essentially can come up with alternative funding strategies. It is, to a certain degree, analogous to certain types of crowdfunding, whereby people can contribute their data in return for, some of the, some perks. But a lot of ethical underpinnings for it have to be worked out. But I think within the very, very nearest future, those will be worked out, because there is really a lot that technology and that even new currency has to offer, besides the fact that those who bought Bitcoins when they were initially in for nothing now can probably fund the entire research institutes. Given on the fact how it traded. So that being said, probably in the future we will probably see the shift towards that model of funding, which is already happening in private companies and private corporations. And the data stored also on blockchain, one part is the potential of funding through it, but also data storage is extremely secure. You can't forge the data. If it's there, it's there. Nobody can break in, nobody can steal it, because in order to ruin the blockchain, you can have to simultaneously hack in, I don't know, for example, 200 computers everywhere. And so it's super secure. And I think the future will be there, and sooner than we think.
It's exhilarating and terrifying all at once, I have to say. Yeah, because it opens up a whole plethora of problems about whose interests are served, and how we monitor and how we support appropriately and all of that. How we share information as well.
How we use personal information that gets there,
Yeah. Thank you. We have a gentleman down here.
Hi, I'm Robert Runte. Used to be an education professor here before I retired. But I'm also a science fiction author, editor, critic. And I wonder if you could talk about the role of science fiction in encouraging people to be interested in science or to look beyond the earth and like that. So do you think that's an important, in terms of education, in terms of getting that collaboration? What role does science fiction play in your science?
So the university that I've taken has ruined science fiction movies for me. But that's actually a really good point. I think that there's an awareness piece that it probably won't be right, or if you make it right, then you need equations and no one will read your books. But you can get on the surface of right and make people more aware. And I think fiction's a great vehicle to do that. You can take that to its extreme, but as long as more people are interested and that encourages them to find out more direct knowledge, I think that's great.
And I who have no stake in this knowledge base at all, but I think a lot of science fiction is really morally and ethically instructive in that sense, which are some of the things that we've been talking about here tonight as well. That science and the moral humanist questions don't necessarily exclude one another, right? That they inform and support each other.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's central, actually, to parts that drive scientists, especially at young or even, for me, at an older age, on. I think there's a couple of things that I can remember the books, I can remember reading them, I can remember being excited by them because they were accessible. And then later on, you can figure out the elements that don't work, but that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. I still think I remember watching, even as a graduate student, Star Trek, and they'd come upon some new planet. And they'd be able to gather all this information, and that's what I do. I remember talking with David actually one time in the hallway about whether or not if you turned around and looked at Earth, if you could detect life on Earth. It was just a thought that he had, and we were talking, and it was like, yeah, that's kind of a sci-fi thought, though. But it would challenge, and it challenged me to challenge a student, and then the student had an idea, and then the project was just for a course, but it was really insightful. But it was just a conversation in the hallway, right? I think, yeah, science fiction is brilliant, just to allow you to expand without the confines, right? So thanks.
Absolutely.
We put a proposal to the Canadian Space Agency about 25 years ago to do exactly this. Could we find that Earth was a habitable planet? And so we proposed to fly a small satellite away beyond the moon's orbit, so you've got the moon orbiting the Earth, and in some random orbits, so you might be looking at Antarctica or the Sahara, and could you, from spectroscopy, figure out that it was a habitable planet? And the CSA sent it to NASA to review. NASA came back and said, this is a really good idea. We wish we'd have thought of it, and we never got any money. But it got us, it's the question that you pose that really fires everything. And now Kepler, there's many missions that are doing and measuring exoplanets. I mean, every day there's another one found. And is it going to be habitable? We don't know. James Webb will go to. So you've got to dream. You've just got to look out. Helen Sawyer-Hogg, she was Canada's first lady of astronomy from the University of Toronto, passed away. She received an honorary degree from the University of Lethbridge, Andy would remember. She made a statement when she opened our observatory, and she said that you can tell the maturity of a civilization, of a country, by the number of observatories it has. And the comment that she was really getting at, you go back to Alexandria. I mean, you go anywhere in the world and do this exercise. The maturity of a civilization, when you fed and watered and clothed and housed everybody, you start looking out and asking questions. And history shows us that when we look out and not at each other, then we're getting to the level that I think society should try to aim for. And I think she was bang on. And she opened our little observatory with that speech, and I will never forget it. So I think science fiction fires us up. Just don't sit next to me in a movie if it's got bad science, because I'll say, that's not going to work.
Let me say, for science fiction, it really, I mean, think if we could harness the human imagination, right? If we can only harness that, if we could harness it in our children, if we can harness it in our students, if we can harness it in ourselves, you know. And science fiction, I think, kind of breaks down those barriers that kind of block in our imagination into this nice, tiny little things of the things that we understand. And so when we lower those barriers, the imagination can soar. And we've seen, again, through history, you know, people that have stood up. I mean, think about it, back in the 1800s, and when the Wright brothers said, like, one day we're going to fly like birds, and everybody thought they were crazy, you know. And look where we are now, and people said, like, one day we're going to walk on the moon. And that was once a flight of fantasy, you know. So it's you know, science fiction becomes reality when we're allowed to release and harness the power of the human imagination.
I love at the Smithsonian Institute, they have the transistor. Bardeen, Britton, and Shockley developed the transistor, the first transistor. It's an ugly device. It's in the Smithsonian. And they won the Nobel Prize for it. And the Nobel Committee gave it to them. And it was so foresightful, because in this thing I've got a bazillion of them. And that little thing changed everything. That transistor in the Smithsonian was a game changer, disruptive on a level that, you know, we just can't really get a handle on. Facebook, social media, everything started with that one thing. It's amazing, and it worked. It was one, and now we have billions.
Yeah, and oftentimes science fiction actually brings in those ethical questions. Because sometimes we go and we dream and we think, oh, that may be an issue here. And in my field, one of the most known science fiction movies is Gattaca. And something that years ago was absolutely ridiculous and people thought was utter science fiction, is actually very, very, very doable and totally easy to do like this, essentially. But then all of a sudden you have all of these ethical issues that, yes, now you have the capacity to do all of these experiments that previously were science fiction. Then the question is, looking at the science fiction novel and then movie, should we actually really do it? What are the repercussions of doing it for us, again, as human beings? One thing is being capable of doing it, and the other thing is actually executing it to the point where you, instead of helping humanity, you actually start hurting it. So that's another very important aspect that science fiction brings, that moral compass that's sort of built into it, which is, I think, very important.
So in case you wondered why you do all that writing.
Yeah.
Okay. Sir.
Thank you, Professor Runty, for taking half of my question. Semi-frivolous, and we'll be hopefully quick. Starting with our guest astronaut, what are your favorite science fiction movies and/or your least favorite?
Oh, boy. I'm going to make somebody mad, right? So, I don't have a least favorite. How about that? So, actually, my favorites. I was never really a Trekkie, but I did enjoy Star Trek as I was growing up as a young child. And just like we had mentioned earlier, I actually liked Lost in Space too. Do you remember that show, Lost in Space?
do.
I just love that. Yeah, Danger Will Run.
Great.
But as a young kid watching Lost in Space, I could picture myself being there. I mean, it just opened up my imagination to, and the latest of those science fiction movies, and whether you like it or not, but the Interstellar movie, and there were some parts of it where I thought were very, very well done. I thought the character building was very good, but there was a line in there where Matthew McConaughey is sitting on the front porch, and he says, you know, back not too long ago, we used to look up at the stars and wonder about our place in the stars. And now all we do is look at the dirt at our feet and worry about our place, the dirt at our feet. And I thought, gosh, how profound and how true to course that is. And nowadays, we worry about, we think in two dimension. We go this way and that way, and we're worried about the little plot of dirt at our feet. And we stopped dreaming. We stopped looking toward the stars, and we stopped looking towards things that are, that now are impossible. They were kind of at the very limits of our imagination, and so we tend to kind of draw back, and we never really realize those things. And so those, my favorite of the latest has been Interstellar. So.
I think we have a little lineup over on this side of the house.
Hello. Sorry, so I don't want for my question to sound callous relative to the rest of the questions that we've had, but I just wanted to know, how do we reconcile the kind of the discourse we've had tonight about space science collaboration and the fact that arguably some of the greatest advances in space science came from a conflict between two world superpowers, and the fact that most of the modern day collaborations are between economic superpowers in the world. So there's kind of the countries, the haves and the have-nots, for lack of a better term. So for all of our collaboration, we still seem to be inherently conflicted.
He's a Newcastle fan.
Very good. Yeah, very good question.
No, it's a good question. I mean, I think competition is good in any walk of life, and I learned that the hard way. I used to play squash, and I thought I was really good against my buddies, and then they said, "You're only good because you beat us, and join a squash league, you'll be terrible," and they were right. So I think competition is really important, but I think we break down boundaries when we work together to do projects that benefit our country. So, for example, the number of spacefaring nations in the world, if you say a spacefaring nation is somebody that has a satellite that they can communicate with, there's like 53. I don't know, it's roughly that number, and most people here would say probably 5 or something, right? So there's a lot that's going on that the average person perhaps doesn't fully understand how this network has benefited. Ethiopia's got a spacecraft in orbit, for example. But you're right, the geopolitics. I worked at the European Space Agency sort of in the era where Russians weren't collaborating with others, but actually we worked with Russians, with the French, and there were ways to make this, maybe it was a subcultural thing, but there were ways to recognize that Russians didn't have access to good equipment, good computers. Well, they were better mathematically. They weren't able to compute with numerical number cruncher, so they actually were better skilled in analog mathematics, and they're very powerful, and history shows that. So I think the common goal, you know, the fact that it's getting so big and so expensive to do the big things that we just have to get on. And science has always broke that, you know, the boundaries down. I'm not as pessimistic as you make it seem. I don't think it's not all driven. Kim Jong-un is not going to the moon. Right, let us say.
Who knows?
Well, it could be arranged.
Hope not.
You look like you're struggling.
It's a very good question. Thank you. I think NASA has tried to kind of overcome this and kind of, again, break down barriers by the resurgence of the commercial base. You know, so they're just to get more people involved in the space business, and that trickles, you know, from when you rise up a commercial base that can now do science in space, and now we also have at NASA, in conjunction with NASA, CASIS, which is the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space, actually an outfit that helps scientists that can't afford to send their science to space. This CASIS is a mechanism to get their science onto the space station, and that's part of our commercial thrust to try to get, because when the commercial base rises up, that kind of trickles down into our universities, into our schools, all the way down to the wee little ones in elementary school. Because now all of a sudden, you're not dealing with a big stodgy, you know, high inertia NASA like a government agency. Now you have your pathway to space, pathway potentially to the moon and onto Mars could be through a lesser known area where it doesn't take all this funding. You have help. They kind of help you along, and you just kind of ride the swell of this commercial resurgence, I guess, in the space business. And so, I mean, that's the idealistic view of NASA getting the commercial. I mean, we look back and I'm just amazed. Now, there's a Tesla out there in space, you know, and we think of these things that are crazy, and it's like all you have to do is just kind of, you know, just give somebody a little bit of a spark, you know, just a little spark, and it'll ignite into innovation and creative thought, you know, globally, and so I think that's NASA's right now their avenue to try to break down these obvious barriers of funding and cost, and the person or the country with the biggest pocketbook wins or whatever. So, and let me go on. Let me finish this by saying that we are so appreciative of the Canadian Space Agency. Some of my best friends are part of that agency, and actually David St. Jacques is launching in December. Let's put a little plug in for David, our next Canadian astronaut to go to the space station. And David's a medical doctor and an engineer, and he's just a terrific person and a terrific ambassador for Canada as well. And so our collaboration in that realm, and then we as astronauts are ambassadors to go to these places that don't have funding. We try to reach to these smaller schools and kind of impoverished areas to try to let kids know, like we little ones, it's like there's a place for you as well. So.
By the way, David, that's where your Tesla is.
Yeah.
It's still orbiting.
That was your
Doesn't help me.
It's still orbiting there.
So we'll take. I see that there's a few people stacked up here. Are you gentlemen in the?
Yeah, I think
he's next. Maybe if we can try to just have like one response to each individual, then we can maybe make sure we get folks covered.
So my name's Alex Giberson, and my question is, we talk about how currency is a big limiting factor for all of our exploration, and we have all these limitations we have these big ideas that we want to accomplish, but there's so many limitations that we have here, and we propose these ideas on how to overcome them, how like getting rid of currency, how we need to stop worrying about, oh, this country doesn't like this, and I don't like you, so I'm not going to work with you. We have all we understand that these are our limiting factors. My question for you guys is just, how would you guys say going about solving these issues? So solving this currency issue, solving the idea how some people don't want to work together, and just basically working together. That's just my question.
My short response to it would be, what's going to win is actually entrepreneurial spirit. There will still be people who have their ideas and their entrepreneurial spirit, and what they will do is they will actually put it upon themselves to reach out and break those boundaries and look creatively for resources, because the time for us to constantly depend upon the government, upon the funding, is actually, I shouldn't say it's coming to an end, but we're seeing, the resources are becoming stretched. And therefore, there needs to be some sort of a merger between, I shouldn't say private and government and industry, but entrepreneurial spirit coming up with, alternative collaborative ideas that will bring it forward. And sometimes somebody can have a genius idea, like Elon Musk had a genius idea, and he took it forward, and look what happened out of it. So it will come from these types of explorations from, those students in the audience who all of a sudden maybe somebody could be next Elon Musk here.
I think the current system we have actually works pretty well. So in space exploration, agencies, NASA, ESA, they have a decadal plan. They put a call out for crazy ideas, and typically you get about 100, and you study those, and it whittles down to, in our case, 35, then 13, and we're in the last 3. But there's competition in all of that. So the process, we don't have enough money to do everything. So the process that we currently have is peer review. You have to get broad community support, not just from your nation, not just from Europe. You have to bring JAXA, you have to bring NASA, you've got to bring other agencies into it. And so there's actually a lot of checks and balances, and I don't think there's a lot wrong with how we currently do it, recognizing that we can't have everything. What we end up with is what has got the most support from the most of the scientific community. So I think it's pretty fair and level.
But there's always a but.
Yeah, there is.
Look to some of the newer ways that people have funded things. Musk has been mentioned a few times tonight. So there's a company that's called Planet. It's got a center here actually in Lethbridge. So there are people that are working here. And they decided that you could make Earth-observing satellites the size of a roll of paper towels and launch them. They built them in their garage. They crowdfunded the money, and they just did it, right? So there's billion-dollar things. Okay, that's clearly going to require some longer-term vision and a 10-year plan. And there's also crazy ideas that you should just try for fun, and there are people who will fund that. Provided we've got Locke's piece put together and we're getting our education done and people aren't terrified to try, then I think there's many different avenues. And we can't predict. I mean, the space agencies have, there's a central mission and vision for all of them, but there's also your own, right? So if you wanted to create your own version of that, where was that guy 10 years ago? Well, it wasn't nowhere 10 years ago. 15 years ago, nowhere, right? Now everyone knows his name. Everyone knows his companies, SpaceX, Tesla. I mean, that was nothing. It was a garage. So don't let it stifle you.
And I have an administrative role that's around funding. And so I think there's an overstatement here that funding is only competitive. A lot of the research that is funded and that is actually called for in these specific ways is collaborative, international, involving, students, new career researchers. And so these things are actually built into the funding model. And although, of course, we do compete with one another, we also talk to one another all the time and learn from each other. So, yeah, it's not as dark as it. Yeah. Have hope. Yeah.
Hi, so my name's Cole. I'm a university student here. My questions for you guys is pertaining to kind of like the privatization of space exploration. We spoke about Musk and SpaceX. Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin, Planet, like you mentioned. There's lots going on. In regards to kind of new marketing strategies and stuff that, to get like crowdsourcing and funding that way. Where do you guys see the future of space exploration being? Do you think there's going to be more privatization, and that's kind of where it's really going to start to take off, or do you think that the answer lies in better, national collaboration between countries and individuals like yourselves to kind of get together and make that happen.
Who wants that?
I'll just say yes. It's both. I mean, you're going to get the best of both, and things will move forward. And not every idea is a good one. Not every idea is a bad one. There's all sizes, I think.
I guess more my question was kind of pertaining, like, do you think that, how much of it's going to be privatized versus, going through space agency and NASA going forward?
I think the problem, the big flagship missions, satellites, there are many companies that make small satellites that can look at the Earth, and there are things they can do, but to explore the universe, you need flagship missions like the Webb, like Herschel, like Hubble, and so those things, you're never going to do this with a small telescope. You have to build an enormous telescope. If you're going to look back in time, you have to cool the detectors. The complexity is quite demanding, and the risk is really high, and space agencies know how to mitigate risk. And the problem I would have with the private sector, its bottom line is to its shareholders, and they want to get the job done to the specs, and risk is they'll throw that out to get where they want to be as fast as possible. So in human flight, I would say it's probably 10 times more the protocol for checking everything than it is for, if a rocket blows up with our instrument, that's bad, but we can't afford that to happen with human life. So how does the private industry handle this risk factor, which is the true currency of what we do, is dealing with that. And agencies are bureaucratic, and it's horrible. We have health and safety, and they're often threatening to shut down my lab because there are there's many ways to die in my lab. I explain this, but we have to minimize this. On the shuttle, we once looked at applying for an experiment on a shuttle, the gas experiment, the getaway special on the shuttle, and you're actually allowed to terminate one astronaut. This is actually in the language. The worst thing that can happen with your instrument, if it goes south, is you will only kill one mission specialist, not a crew member, but one of the Italians, whatever.
That was you.
Yeah. So, they actually put this in the manual for if you build an experiment and something goes wrong with it, the very worst thing that you're allowed to do is terminate one. That's in the manual. It's legalese. It's built in there. This is how they tackle risk. And the worry that I would have with privatization, they'd throw that out the door to get the bottom line. And bureaucracy is a pain in the neck, but in some cases it's the detailed checks and balances that your headaches. It's a headache, but it's there for a purpose.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that for me as a remote sensing person that looks at Earth, while it's great that we've got private industry involved, you still need the big players involved. They do deep time, right? It's just becoming useful is the way I always contextualize it. We don't yet know enough. We've been at it for 40 years only, so within my lifespan, right? You're not going to get a private industry convinced that they should just do something for 40 years before it could even show that it has some utility. Yeah. So you need both visions. I think of it as it's part of a growing ecosystem, really, that you're going to have big stuff, medium-sized stuff, and then things that are more adventurous.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Great question.
So I'll re-instruct the panel. We'll have one answer for each of these last, because we are kind of coming down to a little bit of a timeline. We've got a couple of folks here. We got somebody here. There we go. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Kimberly Getz, and I have read the other day that a gentleman with a ton of money, we'll say a billionaire, approached Elon Musk, and he bought quite a few of the seats for the next spaceship going to Mars. And the plan was this gentleman was going to bring a whole bunch of artists, poets, musicians. They were going to get inspiration off the planet. They were going to come back home. So my question to you is, do you think that the artists and poets and these kinds of people, do you think they'll make the similar impacts to pave the road to space in the similar ways that we are today, the scientists per se?
They will
I
maybe
think-
bring the different view, which a bit more human face to it. Absolutely. It's important.
I think they'll be better at transmitting that message than engineers are, for sure, and dispatch.
They'll be slightly more articulate.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a great question.
It's a great question. All right, gentlemen.
Good evening, panelists. I'd like to thank you for your time here this evening. It's been a pleasure for me to attend. My name is Travis Jones. I am a student at this university. My question is to Dr. David Naylor. You had mentioned how for our energy problem we were going to be leaning towards nuclear fusion. I think a lot of the general population is afraid when they think of nuclear fusion. Dr. Kowalczyk has mentioned solar panels to solve our energy. My question is to you, David, is why do you think fusion will be the way of the future?
It's a good question. I mean, the energy density is an energy density argument. It's the fact that if we can build these reactors small enough, first of all, nuclear scares people, and there's a fundamental difference, and we as professors have to educate the citizenry, and you guys have got to become more science literate to understand the fundamental difference. Basically, you either take a heavy atom, split it up, you get lots of nasty intermediate radioactive isotopes that have very long lifetimes that pollute everything. With fusion, you get helium essentially, which you can put in party balloons, and you get energy, and it's clean, and there's very little weaponizable. So we've been actually working in this area, and I visited the nuclear facility at JET in Oxford, and they actually have a nuclear constabulary. With fission reactors, you actually have to have police armed with guns with bullets like this big, and if somebody's going to come and steal some uranium, plutonium, right, you just shoot, because this is a problem. So it removes terrorism, it removes those aspects. It's extremely clean. We know that the sun does it using gravity. We know how to do it with perhaps lasers or magnetic confinement. There are different, it's becoming, physics has got fusion working for a microsecond. And after that, it's an engineering problem, no disrespect. It goes to, once we've shown that it can do it, then engineers have got to make it work 24/7, because when I flick the lights on, they want to do that. But the thing that appeals to me, it balances the have and the have-nots, right? The developing countries are burning anything they can get to generate, and this is polluting the planet, and it puts them in a difficult spot. This will equalize everything. It will allow clean water anywhere on the planet, because desalination comes free. It fits into our grid. The electric cars that were driven, we knew this would come. And Musk is brilliant. A golf cart is as good as a Tesla 3, because the physics of torque in an electrical motor is proportional to current. So you get in a golf cart, it's as fast as a Tesla 3. So what does Musk do? He says, I'll build the batteries. I'll make the lithium plants in Arizona or wherever he's building this big factory. He gets it. And they need to be charged. And it's just a matter of time until we get this. And once people start driving this, and it's the public, you vote with your wallet, right? I want an electric car. Now, where am I going to plug it in? And who's going to get my electricity here, wherever I am? So electricity is the currency. And free electricity, fusion is, once we get it mastered, it's clean, it's non-weaponizable, it'll solve the problem with desalination, and it will stop polluting the atmosphere to give the planet a chance to heal. We've just got to get there. It's when do we take that? When do we say, let's just do it? And we're trying to develop fusion in a province that is driven by oil, so it's not easy. But yet the University of Alberta has just hired a whole bunch, like 12 professors in fusion. And it's really taken a leap of faith in this area. And Americans, Chinese, Indians, Russia, so many people are involved in ITER. It is definitely a fusion. It's a passion of mine. It has to be here. I won't live long enough to see it, but it will. You will. And it will be a disruptive technology and a game changer on the highest level.
Thank you.
All right, if we, someone over on this side, and then this young woman here, and I think that'll be it.
Good evening. My name is Parijat Purohit. So the thing is that right now everything is classical, like either 0 or 1, the bit. So whenever you are considering the quantum, then there is no longer the bit, the concept is qubit. And I remember something like that, Alice and Bob, they are two different people. We don't know how far away they are. So if Alice wants to send a qubit to Bob, then they're using the quantum teleportation protocol, something like that. So my question is that, what's your feeling, or what do you think that in near future this quantum teleportation can be used, something like I'm here and I can travel through the universe like without any media or something like that? I mean, I don't know, it might seem a little bit fictitious, but yeah, just a question.
We did have a science fiction writer earlier.
physicist.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Does anybody have a
I
good
don't know how to
response
answer
to
that.
No.
Let's get fusion sorted out, and then work on teleportation.
You should crowdfund that.
Yes.
It's an interesting problem. It's an interesting challenge, but I think there's a lot of pieces that aren't quite there yet. But people are chipping away at it. That's about all I can say.
Our last question for the evening. Thank you.
This is a lot scarier than I thought it would be. My name is Kay Jarunte. And my question is, how much sexism have you seen or experienced or come across in your field of study?
So, males. Shall we go around the room?
Well, I mean, physics tends to be male-dominated discipline, and we're trying to address this, and it's slow because it starts back in grade 3, right, when girls are encouraged to do this. So often teachers say, well, maybe you should be doing something else, and we've had some good students. One of my students is now a professor at University of Massachusetts. So there is a path, but it's hard. I would imagine it's hard for a girl to take that and follow through. In terms of from my own experience working with the space agencies and in the projects, we're so focused and so busy, and we appreciate excellence. I'm off to Madrid. The Center for Astrobiology in Cab Inter in Madrid is a NASA-affiliated institute where they do astrobiology. And the person that is designing the grating spectrometer part of the thing that we're working on is Carmen Pastor, and she's a lady, and she's just really, really good at what she does. So I have not seen that. We deal very professionally. We're so focused on looking in the same direction. One never looks at each other. You just get on and do the job. But I think the problem, we have to address this in enrollment in physics and engineering courses. And I have not seen that. But I'm sure it exists at some level. And I went through school mostly with guys, which is unfortunate.
Let me add to that. My first space mission, I launched on the Space Shuttle Discovery. It was October 23rd, 2007, and the commander of our space shuttle was Pam Melroy, the second female commander of a spaceship of the space shuttle. And when we got to the space station, we docked to the space station, and the commander of the space station was a woman named Peggy Whitson, who currently holds the U.S. record for long duration in space. She's been in space for 665 days. And it was awesome, by the way. And to have two commanders when I was in space was just, actually, I have a daughter, so So it actually really, really touched me more than I thought it would, because I'm not blind, So, and I know that I don't know what your struggles have been, but it's all very clear that we're getting better, but we're not there yet, as good human beings, But to have that on board, 2 commanders, both women, I actually cried tears of joy for my daughter, because it's like the world is her oyster now, And then when I went back on a Russian Soyuz, there were 3 Americans on board for 6 months in the summer of 2010. I was on board with 2 women PhD scientists, and that was completely joyful for the same reasons. And so it just kind of, we all have our own, mental barriers that we have to overcome as well, because society puts these, they put limitations on our kids, I think, they put in our society has these kind of made up kind of limitations. So those things did my heart very, very good. I got to tell a real quick funny story. It'll be quick. So I'm an engineer and a test pilot. So I was on board for about a week and a half, and the bathroom, the potty broke on the space station, right? So Shannon Walker and Tracy Caldwell Dyson, 2 brilliant PhD scientists on board with me. And I was trying to muddle through my science in the glove box. And Shannon came up to me. She said, the potty's broken. I was like, well, we're on a spaceship. We need to fix the potty, She said, if you fix the potty, I'll do all of your science. And for this, I was like, that is a deal, So we slapped 5, and it took me about an hour and a half. I did the dumpster dive, and fix that potty. And I found out right away that if you could fix the potty on a spaceship, you're like king of the universe. But whatever, and I know you probably have your own story, and but I would encourage you that don't listen to those voices. Your only limitation is your imagination. That's it.
So I'll tell you a very brief different story from the perspective of a woman. Listen to them, but in a very different way. I should tell you, like in my field, it's almost non-existent anymore. There were times when it actually was existent. In biology, biochemistry, when I was talking to my former PhD postdoc supervisor, who was back in Switzerland, Friedrich Misch Institute, Professor Barbara Hohn, who was one of the first women professors in that field. And she said, you can't even, when we just mentioned something about, how we're not hiring men and women equally and how women are sort of, treated. And she said, you don't even know what being poorly treated means. And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, well, sometime in 50s, when I told my parents that I'm going to be a biochemist, my mother almost kind of disowned me, and she said, aren't you supposed to be, it was it was Austria, 3K, Kinderküche, Kirche. So, and she obviously said, nope, that ain't going to happen. And there was a huge struggle between, and entering it. It's not there anymore. But believe me, years ago, in very, very beginning here, because I have a great opportunity to collaborate with my husband and my, best friend. So we collaborate together with Igor for years and years and years. And when I came here, I submitted the first grant, and the review came back. And the review said, because we co-authored several papers, that I should define my roles in our common publications. The reviews didn't come to him. The reviews came to me. And I was beyond pissed. And I can tell you that our, at that time, VP Research, Dennis Fitzpatrick, was furious over it and about to, carpet bomb the whole, So we did raise the concern. But actually, and I remember crying there and saying, for Pitt's sake, I could do it to both, why are you doing it to the woman? And yes, I listened to it, but it made me so angry. And it actually partially turned me into who I am right now. And then when I had a chance to sit on one of the panels on one of the boards of, and that funding agency, let that name not to be said aloud. So the former CEO at that time, he said, oh, you know, great, so we haven't funded you, but you did really well. And I said, yeah, sure, you fund somebody, you take credit, you don't fund somebody, you take credit. Thank you, you made me very angry. I wanted to prove you damn wrong, and I did. So if anybody is ever really, you know, kind of bringing whatever things kind of stressing you out in that way, just go and prove them damn wrong. That's it. And yes, we can.
So I want to thank everybody who has come tonight, and again have Shelley come back on stage and wrap things up for us.
I don't think I could possibly do justice to the richness of this conversation in a summary, so I'm really not going to try. But I think there were some very interesting ideas, the description of scientists as curious and skeptical and open-minded, the themes of collaboration. And I think we certainly see that within science, and perhaps our biggest challenge might be how to extend that to the governmental level and the planetary level. I hope that you've all found this talk as inspiring as I have, this conversation. I think we see all of these themes coming together in the way these scientists have described how their work contributes to bettering our understanding of our own world, of our planet, of our universe, and about ourselves as humans and our future as humans on this planet. So please join me in thanking our panelists again. Doug, I believe you'd like to come up to the podium?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Is this mic on? Okay. Kathleen, Andy, would you join me up here? Just a small gift on behalf of NASA and our astronaut corps. First of all, this has been great. What a great evening. And things are so much better when we talk, isn't it? I mean, when we sit down and we talk and we brainstorm and come up with innovative ideas. I wanted to present this to the university. This is a Canadian flag flown by your Governor General, Julie Payette, on STS-127. And I wanted to present it on behalf of NASA to the university. And it is a flown flag, and let me read the inscription. This Canada flag was flown aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour to the International Space Station during STS-127 from July 15th to July 31st, 2009, traveling over 6.5 million miles in 248 orbits of the Earth. Extensive robotics and EVA operations completed the Japanese Kibo laboratory on board, replaced 6 P6 batteries, which are at the base of our solar arrays, and delivered critical spare parts to assure the lifetime of the space station. Presented to the University of Lethbridge, a world of thanks for being a launching pad for our young dreamers. So, on behalf of NASA, so thank you. Thank you very much. Kathleen, thank you. Thank you so much. Please. Awesome. Here we go. Let's come on. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So as we conclude, I would like to acknowledge our Associate VP of Students, Kathleen Massey, who arranged Doug's visit and this panel, our moderator, Dr. Claudia Malacrida, and a number of people in both their offices who worked very hard to organize all of this, our panelists, all the behind-the-scenes theater and technical folks who made everything work well tonight. Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Good night.